Last Duchess was written in the Victorian era. The Victorian era was around 1837 to 1901 during Queen Victoria's reign. Robert Browning was one of the most famous poets at the time. Most of his poems were about power and corruption, which is common for Victorian poems. Victorian poetry is known to have dark themes and characterized by murder and mysteries. An example would be Sherlock Holmes stories.
This poem is an allusion to the real Duke of Ferrara, Alfonso II d'Este. He was speculated to be the Duke in the poem because his wife Lucrezia di Cosimo de' Medici had died just after 2 years in their marriage.
That's my Last Duchess painted on the wall, looking as if she were alive. I call that piece a wonder now. Frau Pandolf's hands worked busily a day, and there she stands. Will't please you sit and look at her? I said Frau Pandolf by design, for never read strangers like you that pictured countenance, that depth and passion of its earnest glance. But to myself they turned, since none puts by the curtain drawn for you but I, and seemed as they would ask me if they durst, how such a glance came there. So not the first are you to turn and ask thus. Sir, 'twas not her husband's presence only called that spot of joy into the Duchess's cheek. Perhaps Frau Pandolf chanced to say, her mantle laps over my lady's wrist too much. Or paint must never hope to reproduce the faint half-blush that dies along her throat. Such stuff was courtesy, she thought, and cause enough for calling up that spot of joy. She had a heart,
how shall I say, too soon made glad, too easily impressed. She liked whate'er she looked on, and her looks went everywhere. Sir, 'twas all one, my favour at her breast, the dropping of the daylight in the west, the bough of cherries some officious fool broke in the orchard for her, the white mule she rode with round the terrace, all and each would draw from her alike the approving speech, or blush at least. She thanked men good, but thanked somehow, I know not how, as if she ranked my gift of a 900-years-old name with anybody's gift. Who'd stoop to blame this sort of trifling? Even had you skill in speech, which I have not, to make your will quite clear to such a one, and say, just this or that in you disgusts me. Here you miss, or there exceed the mark. And if she let herself be lessoned so, nor plainly set her wits to yours, forsooth, and made excuse, even then would be some stooping, and I choose never to stoop. Oh, sir, she smiled, no doubt, whenever I passed her, but who passed without much the same smile? This grew, I gave commands, then all smiles stopped together. And there she stands.
Alive. Will't please you rise? We'll meet the company below then. I repeat, the Count your master's known munificence is ample warrant that no just pretence of mine for dowry will be disallowed. Though his fair daughter's self, as I avowed at starting, is my object. Nay, we'll go together down, sir. Notice Neptune, though, taming a sea-horse, thought a rarity, which claws of Innsbruck cast in bronze for me.
The speaker in this poem is the Duke of Ferrara, located in northern Italy, speaking to an emissary about arranging a marriage between himself and the daughter of the emissary's count.
The central purpose of this poem is to showcase the speaker's evil nature amidst all his power and status. One possible theme to the poem is that great power and control can corrupt and make people less susceptible to basic morality, which makes even the cruelest of deeds appear justifiable. Robert Browning uses iambic pentameter throughout the poem. He also uses enjambed sentences to show that the Duke is very pompous, who also likes to take control. The poem is structured to be a dramatic monologue to show the Duke's controlling character over the audience in the poem. The structure also contains dramatic shifts. In lines 1 to 24, the Duke is reminiscing, and then the poem shifts from lines 25 to 46, where the Duke speaks of the Duchess's character and death. Then the poem shifts once again in line 54, where the Duke speaks of another art piece, that is of Neptune taming a seahorse.
In this poem, most of the imagery is used to convey the beauty of the Duchess or her flirtatious nature. Lines 25 to 31 list several gifts that the Duchess views with equal enjoyment. From a bough of cherries to the Duke's status, all gifts were supposedly the same under her eyes and met with the same joyous response, which alludes to her more unfaithful nature. The poet conveys her actual beauty on lines 17 to 19, where the Duke reminisces how Frau Pandolf probably commented that paint must never hope to reproduce the faint half-blush that dies along her throat. This line also showcases the Duke's evil nature with the diction choice of dies, which foreshadows the Duchess's death at the hands of the Duke.
Another line that leads to the implication that the Duke killed the Duchess is on lines 1 to 2, where the Duke describes the painting of the Duchess as looking as if she were alive. This creepy comparison to her living form ironically creates the dark implication that the Duke had to be present during her death in order to know the difference between her being dead and her being alive.
It is on lines 45 to 46 where the poet finally reveals why he would know the difference and cements the idea that he murdered her. Throughout the poem, the Duke mentions several reasons why he was unsatisfied with the Duchess, the main reason being her unfaithfulness. He mentions how she would often smile to him, but the Duke argues that she would smile to others in the exact same way. He then gave commands, then all smiles stopped together. Given that the Duchess is deceased, it is implied that it was not just her smile that stopped, but her life completely.
The Duke could not live with the idea that the Duchess was not under his complete control, so he killed her and instead kept the one thing related to her that he could control, her painting. Unlike the living Duchess, a painting will not move and definitely not flirt with other men, so, for the Duke, this was ideal. As mentioned on lines 9 to 10, he had her painting placed on his wall and hidden behind a curtain so that only the Duke could decide when the painting could be seen by himself or others. This and one other piece of artwork in his home reveal the basis of the Duke's evil nature, his desire for complete control and power.
In lines 54 to 56, the final lines of the poem, the Duke mentions one last piece of artwork to the emissary before deciding to depart downstairs where the rest of the company is located. It is a statue of Neptune taming a seahorse casted in bronze. This statue acts as a symbol for the Duke's complete control of his former wife, as the statue itself represents the control of beauty.
The statue and the painting of the Duchess hidden behind a curtain are both symbols of the control and power the Duke desires, which create the overarching theme that power can often distort people's moral code. The Duke as a character is manipulative and cruel, but does not feel guilty about how he acts because he believes that he should have complete control over everything due to his high status. He will do anything to maintain this power, even going as far as killing his former wife because there was no other way to keep her under his thumb. A modern example would be actual power-hungry leaders who would do anything to maintain their control. The Duke is a representation of men who had behaved this way during Browning's time in order to gain land and status.
This poem and its tone as a whole is eerie and dark. Not only is it implied that the Duke was so controlling that he felt the best way to deal with his wife was to murder her, but there is a potential for another victim. Throughout this poem, the Duke is speaking to an emissary in hopes of arranging a marriage between himself and the daughter of the emissary's count. On lines 52 to 53, the Duke says that his fair daughter's self is his object, which creates the possibility that the Duchess may not be his final victim of his obsessive nature. So there may be room for one more painting on the Duke's wall.